Welcome to the debate. Today we are dissecting a tension that sits right at the center of the modern human experience, yet we rarely have the precision to actually name it. We are looking at the concept of the lens that changes everything from the source material, and specifically, we are curiously exploring what language might be most influential for people to recognize our constructed reality as something worth examining. I want to start by putting two contradictory statements on the table. Statement 1. As a biological organism, I exist in continuous interdependence with the environment and other humans.
And statement 2, as a social identity, I am expected to compete, differentiate, and prove my worth within a larger system.
Exactly. Now here's the friction. Statement 1, our biological interdependence is a fact. You can go to a library, open a biology textbook, and verify it. We are social mammals. We literally require co-regulation to survive. But statement 2, that is a narrative. It is a story we have told ourselves for roughly 10,000 years. And yet, for almost everyone, statement 2 feels truer. It feels like the dominant reality.
Because for all intents and purposes, it is reality. I mean, you can verify statement 1 in a library, sure, but you verify statement 2 every single time you pay a bill, or apply for a job, or look at your bank account. The central question we are wrestling with today isn't just which one is scientifically true, but why the story of competition completely overrides the fact of connection. And frankly, I am quite skeptical that simply knowing the difference or changing our language around it actually helps us survive the demands of that system.
That is the core challenge. My position is that we are suffering from a massive case of mistaken identity. We have confused a civilizational shortcut for human nature. We need to look upstream, which is a key term in the text, to see that the pressure to compete is structural, it is not personal. By applying specific verification frameworks, language like origin triangulation, we can actually dismantle the psychological weight of that pressure. It is about using language to verify statement 2 as a construct rather than an absolute truth.
And I am taking the position that, structural or not, the pressure is highly functional. I am here to represent the reality of the world we actually live in, not just the one we biologically evolved for. I am highly skeptical that changing our lens is enough to override the visceral feedback loops of modern life. If I am broke or burned out, simply renaming my pain as structural misalignment doesn't change the outcome. I need to know why this specific language, calling it a shortcut or a lens, is actually influential enough to matter when the rubber hits the road.
A very fair challenge. Let's look at why that functional reality feels so heavy and why we desperately need new language to verify what is actually happening. The source material argues that we are essentially trying to run 2-million-year-old biological software on 10,000-year-old civilizational hardware. This is what the author explicitly calls civilization's shortcut.
Break that down a bit. Because civilization usually gets the credit for keeping us safe, fed, and warm. It gave us antibiotics, it gave us the internet. Why frame it as a shortcut?
It is a shortcut for coordination. Look, about 10,000 years ago, we moved from small, interdependent tribes to massive agricultural cities. You simply cannot coordinate millions of people through deep, trusted relationships. There just isn't enough time. So civilization created an abstraction layer: rules, roles, currency, and hierarchies. We optimized for speed and scale, not human coherence. The argument here is that we need a specific verifying language, specifically the origin triangulation lens, to actively distinguish between what is humanity, our biology, what is civilization, the system, and what is individual formation.
I see the logic there, but in practice, most people collapse those three things into one incredibly messy experience. If I am failing in civilization, say I get fired from a job or my startup goes under, I don't pause and think, oh, the system is mismatched. I feel like a bad human. The pain is immediate and deeply personal.
Precisely. That is exactly the trap. The material suggests that once we have the language to label the competition narrative as a civilizational mechanism, rather than a human flaw, we verify it as a system. It stops being "I am broken" and it immediately becomes this system is not designed for my biology. That is a massive shift in verification. It transforms the pain from a moral indictment into a mechanical signal.
Right. It is a shift in perception. But does it actually hold up against the self-help loop? This is a concept in the material that I found particularly damning. The self-help loop essentially weaponizes statement 2. It says, if you are in pain, work harder. If you fail, well, you didn't manifest enough. It totally validates the idea that you are the problem.
Which is exactly why the text argues we need to exit the self-help loop entirely. Self-help usually tries to make you a better competitor in statement 2. Human help, or the verified lens, tries to align you with statement 1. The most influential language here is a refusal to call it help at all, but rather restoration.
But the world provides immediate, tangible feedback. Rejection, shame, poverty, all of that validates the competitive story of statement 2. You're suggesting we use intellectual language to fight visceral, physical experience. Can a lens really compete with the cortisol spike of a rejection letter? That is a chemical reality. It is not just a story.
It isn't about using language to ignore the rejection. It is about using language to stop the internal hemorrhage that makes the rejection feel life-threatening. This brings us directly to the mechanism of how we verify our own reality. The material introduces a very specific formula. BTSD equals O. Belief, thought, speech, deed equals outcome.
I have to stop you right there. Belief, thought, speech, deed. I mean, this sounds incredibly close to manifesting or The Secret. It sounds like just another mindset hack. Change your belief, change your life. How is this fundamentally different from the toxic positivity we see everywhere? Because if the answer is just to believe better, we might as well wrap up the debate right now.
I completely agree. If it were just positive thinking, it would be useless. But the text argues this is mechanical, not motivational. That is a crucial distinction. The argument is that we usually try to change the deed. We work harder, we hustle, we grind, all to change the outcome. But if the upstream belief is I am separate and I must compete to justify my existence, then no amount of deed will ever fix the internal outcome. The outcome isn't just the external event, it is the internal interpretation of that event.
Okay, walk me through a concrete example. Let's take that rejection letter or a failed project we mentioned earlier.
Okay. The external outcome is you didn't get the job. If your upstream belief is statement 2, that you must compete to have worth, then the thought becomes, I am not good enough. The speech, your internal dialogue, becomes, I am a failure. And the deed might be frantically applying for 50 more jobs out of pure panic. The result is exhaustion and deep shame.
Right, and that sounds like a standard Tuesday for a lot of people. So how does your version work?
If the upstream belief is statement 1, I am a valuable biological organism regardless of my employment status, the outcome is exactly the same. You still don't have the job. But the verification is entirely different. The outcome of rejection is verified as data about the market, not a verdict on your soul. You don't hemorrhage energy on shame. You might still be disappointed, absolutely, but you aren't destroyed.
I can definitely see the utility of saving energy. But let's look at the O in that formula again, the outcome. In the text, the outcome isn't just a feeling. It is often actual suffering, burnout, failure. If I am a starving artist, the outcome is that I am quite literally hungry. You are saying that if I look upstream and change my belief to I am biologically interdependent, the outcome changes. The market doesn't care about my biological interdependence. It doesn't pay for it.
The market doesn't? No, but your nervous system does. And your nervous system is the engine that drives your ability to function in that market. If you are a starving artist, statement 2 civilization says you are a failure because you aren't rich. Statement 1, biology says you are a relational creature trying to sell a relational product in a transactional market. The outcome is simply information that the system is mismatched.
That actually leads us directly to this concept of governed versus natural creativity from the text. I found this distinction interesting, though I do wonder if it is just a comfort mechanism for people who aren't succeeding. The material claims natural creativity is innate and curiosity-driven, while governed creativity is market-driven and performance-based.
It is a vital distinction, not just a comfort mechanism. Governed creativity is what happens when we force our biological capacity for play into a rigid, civilizational mold of productivity. We verify statement 2, that we must prove our worth by turning our art or our coding or our management style into a sheer product. And when it doesn't sell, we feel shame.
But isn't all professional creativity governed by definition? If I want to be a professional writer or an architect or a software engineer, I have to be governed by deadlines, clients, and budgets. If I retreat entirely to natural creativity, I might be fulfilled, sure, but I am also unemployed. I can't just tell my boss, sorry, my natural creativity doesn't really feel like working today.
You are creating a binary where there really doesn't need to be one. You can participate in governed creativity, meeting the deadline, pleasing the client, without becoming it. The text uses the phrase restoring relationship rather than performing identity.
Meaning what exactly? That sounds a bit abstract.
Meaning, I can verify that governed creativity is just a game rule. It is the constraints of the chessboard. It is not a measure of my intelligence or my fundamental worth. If I verify that, I actually regain access to my natural creativity even within those constraints. I can play the game without becoming the game. The starving artist isn't starving because they lack talent. They are starving because they are trying to monetize a relational instinct in a highly transactional system. That specific verification restores capacity. You stop fighting yourself.
I want to push deeper into this idea of fighting yourself. You mentioned separateness earlier. The source material has this concept of all one thing. Now, I have to be completely honest. When I read all one thing, my skepticism radar immediately went off. It sounds spiritual, it sounds like metaphysics. We started this debate talking about things you can verify in a biology textbook. How is all one thing verifiable? Because to me, I am sitting here, you are sitting there, and we are definitely separate entities.
I totally understand skepticism. It does sound like New Age philosophy, but the author insists it is rigorous biology. The illusion of separation, Statement 2's core idea, that we are distinct, hermetically sealed units, is biologically false. Our nervous systems are literally open loops. We co-regulate.
Co-regulate. That is the anchor term here?
Yes. If I walk into a room and I am highly anxious, your heart rate and your blood pressure will likely elevate. That is a verifiable biological fact. We are physically interconnected via our nervous systems. The all-one-thing lens is just the necessary language for acknowledging that physical reality. When we feel profound loneliness, it isn't a social failure. It is a biological signal that the connection, the actual circuit, has been severed.
Okay, I can follow the biology of co-regulation. That is measurable in a lab. But the text applies this to everything, to the past, to the environment. It claims we aren't separate from our past. That sounds a lot like therapy speak.
Or it is just neuroscience. Your past literally lives in your current neural pathways. You aren't separate from it. It is the physical structure of your brain right now. The point of the all-one-thing lens is to verify that what we routinely call individual problems are usually systemic interruptions. The language forces us to zoom out.
So, if I am lonely, Statement 2 says, go out and make friends, stop being antisocial. Statement 1 says what?
Statement 1 says, your environment is failing to provide the co-regulation your species requires.
And that is exactly where I get stuck. That feels incredibly disempowering. If the environment is the problem, and civilization is the problem, and I am just a biological organism trapped in a shortcut, what do I actually do? It feels like this framework entirely validates my pain, but completely removes my agency. If it is all just the system, then I am just a passive victim of a 10,000-year-old mistake.
I am not convinced by that line of reasoning, mostly because the text argues that true agency comes from alignment, not control. If I stop trying to fix myself, which is impossible anyway, because I am not broken, I can start trying to fix my conditions. I can stop engaging in the self-help loop of trying to willpower my way out of loneliness and instead actively seek small moments of co-regulation. The influential language shifts from fix me to fix the interface.
Let's talk about that in the context of the burnout epidemic, because this is really where the rubber meets the road. The pragmatist in me knows that burnout is intensely real. The text calls it overwhelmed regulation rather than depleted motivation.
Yes, that is a crucial linguistic shift. Depleted motivation implies you just need a pep talk or another cup of coffee. Overwhelmed regulation implies your nervous system has blown a literal fuse.
But does renaming it actually fix it? If I am working 3 jobs just to survive, statement 2, the harsh economic reality, I am going to be burnt out. Calling it overwhelmed regulation doesn't give me a nap. It doesn't put money in my bank account. It just gives me a slightly fancier way to describe my sheer exhaustion.
No, it doesn't pay the rent, but it absolutely stops you from adding the second arrow. The first arrow is the physical exhaustion of the 3 jobs. The second arrow is the internal shame. I am weak. I should be able to handle this. Why is everyone else coping and I am not? That second arrow is what actually kills us. That is the internal hemorrhage we talked about.
That is a fair point. The story of statement 2 adds a heavy layer of moral failure to what is essentially physical exhaustion. We assume that if we were simply better humans, we wouldn't be so tired.
Exactly. The verification we are looking for is this. Statement 2 exists as a pressure, but statement 1 is our design. Burnout is the collision of that pressure and that design. When you verify that with the right language, you stop trying to hack your way out of burnout with more productivity tools, which is really just more statement 2, and you start actually respecting the biological limits. You realize you are a finite organism operating in an infinite demand system.
So the argument is that civilization optimized for speed and scale, but humans optimize for rhythm and connection, and we are all just paying the massive tax on that difference.
The civilizational shortcut. We bypassed human perception to get extreme efficiency. And now we are looking around wondering why we are so efficient but so utterly miserable.
I want to go back to the starving artist example for a second, because I think it really highlights the core tension between these two lenses. The text mentions that artists often feel they must suffer for their art. Statement 2 completely validates that suffering as the required cost of entry.
It does. It says, if it was truly valuable, it would make money. That is the cold logic of the market.
Right. And if you don't make money, you aren't valuable. So how does origin triangulation actually help the artist who is on the verge of giving up? Not philosophically, but practically. Give me the language that keeps them going.
It allows them to triangulate the actual source of the failure. This is the diagnostic tool. The artist asks, is this failure humanity? No, humans inherently love art. We have been making it for 2 million years. Is it individual formation? Maybe. Maybe you need to practice your craft more. Sure. But is it civilization? Yes. The market simply does not know how to value natural creativity until it becomes a neat, packaged commodity.
So the verification is, my work has value because it is human, even if the market hasn't figured out how to price it yet.
Yes. And that verification is the fundamental difference between quitting in shame and persisting in difficulty. It is the difference between I suck and this market is blind.
But that requires a tremendous amount of internal fortitude. To trust statement 1, the biological truth, when the entire world, every single billboard, every social media feed is screaming statement 2. It feels like you are asking people to be Zen monks in the middle of Times Square.
It does feel like that, but that is exactly why we need this specific language. Words like upstream, governed creativity, and origin triangulation act as a cognitive shield. They let us verify our own reality against the, well, I will use the word, the gaslighting of the system. Without the language, we just have this vague, heavy feeling that something is terribly wrong. With the language, we have a map.
Gaslighting is a strong word, but I suppose it fits. The system constantly tells you that if you are tired, you are lazy. If you are poor, you are unambitious. If you are lonely, you are unlikable.
And the lens of verification tells you, no, if you are tired, you are a biological organism under extreme strain. If you are struggling, you are navigating a shortcut that was never built for you. If you are lonely, you are just disconnected from your herd.
I think what I am still wrestling with is the deed part of the BTSD equation we touched on earlier. If I change my belief, does my deed actually change? Do I stop working the 3 jobs? Because if I stop working, I starve. Biology doesn't save me from starvation.
Maybe not immediately, but the quality of the deed absolutely changes. You stop working with deep resentment. You stop working with shame. And oddly enough, when the nervous system stops constantly bracing against the shame, your capacity returns.
The text argues that a massive amount of our exhaustion isn't the work itself, it is the energy spent managing the disconnect between who we truly are and who we are told to be.
So the civilizational shortcut saves time for the system, but it costs immense energy for the human.
Perfectly said. And reclaiming that energy requires verifying through our language that the shortcut is the problem, not the human.
I have to admit, there is something deeply relieving about the concept of structural misalignment. It definitely takes the heat off. But I do worry it could become a convenient excuse. Oh, I am not lazy. I am just structurally misaligned. I can easily see people using this exact language to completely avoid personal accountability.
That is a valid risk. But the text argues that natural creativity and humanity are inherently active, curious, and deeply relational. Laziness is usually a freeze response. It is not a natural state. If we remove the structural blockage and the shame, people generally want to contribute.
That is a fundamentally optimistic view of human nature.
It is a biologically verified view. Just look at children. Before they learn statement 2, before they learn social identity and competition, are they lazy? No, they are relentless learning machines. They are interdependent, highly creative, and constantly active. That is statement 1 in action.
That is a compelling point. We basically learn to be stuck.
We learn to be governed. We learn to wait for external permission.
As we wrap this up, I find myself reflecting on the true utility of these lenses. I came in quite skeptical that mere language could compete with harsh economic reality. And while I still believe statement 2, competition, is the unavoidable rule of the road we have to drive on, I can see how the language of lenses provides a deeply necessary shock absorber.
That is a great metaphor, because the road is undeniably bumpy.
Exactly. Acknowledging that pain is a structural misalignment rather than a personal defect doesn't magically pay the bill, but it might give me the mental clarity to figure out how to pay the bill without hating myself in the process. It shifts the problem from a profound moral failing to a mechanical mismatch. And mechanical problems are, at least in theory, solvable.
Exactly. And that is the ultimate goal here. We aren't pretending statement 2 doesn't exist. We are verifying it as a construct, a game, rather than an absolute commandment. We are moving from fixing ourselves to restoring alignment with our biological reality.
And I suppose that is where the practical hope lies, not in escaping the system entirely. We can't just all walk into the woods, but in refusing to let the system define our internal reality. We can live in the city, but actively respect the biology underneath.
The most influential language is ultimately the language we use to explain our own lives to ourselves. If we can swap the lens of personal failure for the lens of civilizational shortcut, we regain our footing.
It really comes down to which truth you choose to verify. The one in the biology textbook or the one on the corporate billboard.
And the beauty of this framework is we have the agency to choose the lens. Thank you for joining us on The Debate.
See you next time.